Howdy. Apparently it's too dark to run with the light off right now. Anyway, we're going to do the live reading of Speculum, Chapter 18. I apologize for missing the last few weeks. Just had a lot of stuff going on, and I haven't been able to get around to it. So we'll get this underway and get back to our lives. Chapter 18, Lost Time. The forest was dark and gloomy, yet it held an odd comfort. It wasn't so much the outstretched limbs overhead blocking out the little sunlight that made it through, nor was it the constant roll of clouds or the continual downfall of snow. It was an eerie presence, lingering in the shadows, like he was being watched. Of course he knew he was, but that wasn't the point. There was something else, something ancient and powerful, yet it held a tranquil yet deadly. It felt tranquil yet deadly at the same time. Putting the feeling to the back of his mind, Demetrix followed his escorts through the wall of thorns. They passed through as if they weren't really there. Chancing fate, he followed after, surprised by the illusion. The most serene and beautiful city he'd ever seen rested on the other side, awaiting exploration. It was elevated off the forest floor by hundreds of thick, stilt-looking beams carved from living trees at their base. Luscious green ivy stretched across the white marble-looking wood, climbing its way to the elegant rails. The suspended platform stretched out in 4 teardrop-shaped balconies. A white series of towers shot to the heavens in the center, arched and contorted perfectly between one another. It was a fortress city. Or if a fortress city could be described as perfect, this one qualified. Lost in the sight, Demetrix realized he had stopped. It was short-lived. One of his captors shoved him into action, forcing him onward. He obeyed, continuing toward the magnificent structure. They led him under one of the towering rises and approached one of the thick pillars. It was as if the low light was playing tricks on him. Out of nowhere, a spiraling ramp appeared, wrapping its way up and disappearing into the underside of the ceiling. Reaching the top, elegance grew. Not only was it a sight to behold from afar, but up close it rivaled no other. This city glowed bright in a land of dark. Every beam, pillar, and wall was the color of pearl, unmarred by a single smudge of out-of-place dirt. Platforms lined the manicured gardens, forming walkways between the smooth buildings he hadn't seen from the ground. Every so often, pearl vines grew from the emerald green grass, intertwining around one another and separating at the top to form an odd cage of sorts. A glowing blue orb floated freely inside each one, illuminating the landscape in all directions. Lost in the sheer magnificence of it all, Demetrix hadn't noticed the group of Alfar approach him. "Captain Tarl, what have we here?" Demetrix turned, hearing a voice made of honey. As beautiful as the city was, it didn't hold a candle to her radiance. A thin white dress covered her slender frame, revealing much of her shoulders and back. The long pointed ears shot through her straightened brown hair. She carried no weapons, yet her muscle tones suggested she was familiar with a blade. He felt his heart race beneath his chest, finding it hard to be in her presence. "My Lady Eladon, we found this one in the fields of Shinar. We ambushed an orc caravan headed for Idenfall. He killed 2 of our men from Krindar Pass." "Krindar Pass?" "Yes, my lady." She arched an eyebrow, looking the prisoner over. "Let me see his bow." One of the Alfar stepped forward, handing her the wooden instrument. The limbs were covered in a ruined brown leather and held in place by tightly wrapped forest green sinew. The braided string matched the sinew strung on one end. She took the weapon and, examining its construction, quickly stringing it, she drew, inspecting the flexed wood. Letting the tension fade, she unstrung it and returned it to the Alfar. "That's a nice weapon. Did you make it yourself?" Demetrix didn't know what to say. Lost in her beauty, he found the first words that popped into his head. Yes?" Eladon smiled at his discomfort. "Release him." Directing her words to the archer, she continued, "Walk with me, and know any hostility shown toward my people will be met with swift and unforgiving justice." She turned and strode away. Demetrix hesitated. uncertain why she would trust a perfect stranger. Not that she didn't have enough security in the event of an attack. He followed after her. Seeing he was at her side, Elrond led him through the center archway and into the main keep. "You're quite the shot. Krendar passed to the fields of Shannara. That's a 1 in a million shot, and you did it twice. I could use an archer like you, but I'm troubled. You don't seem like an agent of Shadow. Why did you kill 2 of my men? Surely you understand the danger the orcs pose, yet you interfere in a successful ambush, resulting in a greater number of casualties." Finding his ability to speak, Demetrix chose his words carefully. "I regret having to kill those men. I didn't want to. They were attacking the wrong target." "Wrong target? Were they human? Elves? Orcs don't typically take prisoners to Idenfall." "I'm afraid you misunderstand. One of my companions was captured and loaded onto the caravan. I'd been tracking them for quite some time when your men attacked. I had no problem with that. It was when they went after my friend that I had to step in." "I understand protecting your friend. I'm sorry my men got in the way of that. But I feel like you aren't telling me something. Unless your friend was an orc, he shouldn't have had anything to fear from my men." Demetrix paused, unsure if he should tell her or not. Elrond stopped, turning to wait for him. "Krenin is half-orc, though not of this land. He's not like the orcs here." "I find that somewhat hard to believe. I've never met an orc that didn't raid, rape, and pillage for the pleasure of it, much less one that was capable of having friends." "Have you ever seen a green orc?" "No." "You've never met an orc like Krenin, then?" "Well, even if your friend is different, I fear he won't be for long. Once he reaches Idenfall, he'll be trained to forget everything he's ever known. If he survives that, they will rebuild him to be like them. It's a safe assumption that your friend is gone." Demetrix took a deep breath. There was logic in her words. Resuming his pace, he took position beside her once again, walking wherever she was leading him. "I fear he won't make it that far. He was wounded when he was captured. He was wounded when I was captured. He's probably dead by now. Even so, I owe it to him to make sure. And if by some miracle he lives, I have to try and rescue him. I can't fault that. That's the very attitude that spawned the rebellion and makes us different than them." She passed through the inner courtyard and into the centermost building. It shot into the sky, seeming to reach the clouds. Demetrix found it strange. The size of this place should have made it visible for days in any direction, yet he couldn't recall seeing it prior to being here. "Brianna, I'm doing my reading. Can you please go away for a little bit?" "Thank you."
"I'm starving, please don't."
"We'll go get food in a bit." "How are you able to keep this place from being overrun?" "We have the area cloaked. From the outside it reflects back, making it seem as if it's not here. It's taken hundreds of years, but the orcs won't come into the forest. Our survival is dependent upon discrepancy. We never attack from the same place more than once, and we never lead our enemy back to our gate." Following the twisting corridors, she stopped outside a single door. Demetrix stood upon the red carpet lining the halls. The walls were mostly bare, save for the groomed ivy and other plants hanging here and there. He stared at her, uncertain why she had stopped here of all places. "You're welcome to reside in this room while you're here. If you need anything, you can find a guard at either end of the hall, or you can find me to the right and at the end. I'll have all your gear returned to you. Please take a moment to clean up. I'd appreciate it if you would join me for dinner." He hadn't expected any of that. Blushing, he thought as quickly as his mind would let him. "It would be my pleasure." Giving a shallow bow, Demetrix mimicked Ravion's curtsy. Section change. Gareth twisted the arrow, probing deeper into the wound. "Don't play games with me. You know who I'm talking about." Wiping the blood from his longsword, Ravion sheathed it and picking up the heavy bow. He approached and knelt beside Gareth, staring at the defeated and bloodied orc. "Getting anything?" He was just about to tell me where they took him. Twisting the shaft a little harder, Gareth forced the head into meat, watching it tear the hole wider. He pressed his knee into the muscle of the orc's arm, constricting the veins and keeping it numb and unable to function. Straining to focus, he forced his will into the brute's mind. He could feel the defying thoughts urging him to dig deeper. The answers were there, he just had to find them. Images of battle and blood filled his mind. He could see this orc's desire. It was almost as if he were a slave to his own bloodlust. The orc howled in pain, feeling the iron head wedge itself between his ribs. "I don't know. Why don't you ask someone else?" Ravion glanced at the fleeing humans. Most of them wanted nothing to do with this. The few that watched kept their distance for fear of retribution. This isn't getting us anywhere. We need to get moving. I'm sure another group is on its way by now. Almost. Returning his attention to the orc, Gareth continued. "I know you're dumb, but you're really going to tell me you don't remember seeing a smaller green orc within the last few days? I mean, come on. The way I understand it, this is the only green orc this land has." The orc was silent for a few moments, clearly searching his memory. "I saw green orc months ago. He taken to Idenfall, trained as orc." "Impossible. He was taken from the tavern just yesterday." Gareth felt the orc's mind unlock, revealing all his secrets. The orc's telling rang true. How is that possible? "Kill me if you want. Changes nothing. We've learned all we're going to from this one." Gareth brought his dagger down, cutting the orc's meaty throat. It gargled in protest, drowning in its own blood. "Tell me, how could we lose a few months in a single night?" You don't believe him, do you? I was able to see into his mind. He wasn't lying. "Interesting. The only thing we've done is go to the library. I've heard stories of certain places that remain outside of time. I suppose that would make sense as to how they keep the magic from being detected." "I guess. If it's been a few months, where do you think Demetrix and Crinden are?" "Hard to say. Though it seems our answers await in Idenfall. The sooner we get there, the sooner we find out what the hell's going on." Ravion tossed the orcish crossbow over his shoulder. The crude weapon was unwieldy, but it was good to have distance if they needed. "The tunnels are this way." Ducking into the alley, they disappeared from sight. Section change. A cool cloth rested against his forehead, absorbing the beating sweat pouring from him. Lying on a wooden table, his eyes shot open, taking in the sight of the hide-covered hut. Crinden watched the heat waves rise to the open top, melting the bits of snow that dared float into the hole. The room was warm, he knew that much, yet he remained cold. Trying to sit, a shooting pain erupted in his chest. "Rest, you not ready yet." Crinden turned his head to find a gray-skinned orc standing a few feet from him. He held a stone bowl in his hand, working a wooden pestle inside. The contents crunched, echoing a coarse grinding sound. Straining against the pain, Crinden inspected his chest, seeing where the spear had pierced. The wound was swollen and black, packed by a faint green, nearly white paste. Thick yellow fluid bubbled around the edges. "What happened?" "You run through. Lucky from look, nothing important got hit, but the poison took toll. You got infected." The orc approached and wiped away the bubbling fluid. "How'd I get here?" "Ward Rider brought you. Only 3 survive. The Shadow looking out for you. War Chief say you important. Don't want to die without honor." "War Chief." "You meet in time. Rest now. Take care of pups tomorrow. Go to train when healed." Laying back, Crinden watched the heat roll from the opening, feeling his strength fade away. Closing his eyes, he drifted off to sleep. Section change. The following day, Crinden sat up, feeling the wound pool. It was numb, but it didn't hurt any less. The deep purple skin had faded, returning to a bruised green. Pulling the wool shirt over his body, he hooked the wooden buttons, running the chest. Pulling it together, it was a few sizes too big, but it was better than nothing. Stepping out of the leather flap, Crinden felt the cold assault him. It burned his lungs and froze his nose hair. The light bit of moisture clinging around his mouth instantly froze. The sounds of combat echoed all around. Searching all directions, Crinden found himself in the middle of the largest orc settlement he'd ever seen. Even the capital of Tolgrim was nothing compared to this, though it was more pleasant to look upon. In the distance there was a huge stone castle surrounded by a wall. A large mountain range wrapped wrapped around engulfing much of the stonework. The orc buildings were crude in comparison, but equally magnificent. The majority of the space was taken by a series of pits, most of them filled with orcs locked in melee. Each one wore little more than rags, though their superiors were dressed in full armor. A wolf's howl caught his attention. Recalling his duties, Crinan noticed what looked to be a rather large stable, though it didn't have the typical corral he'd grown accustomed to seeing in such places. The churned snow beneath his feet was packed tight, refusing to make a sound. Pressing a heavy-soled boot into it, Crinan took his first steps, nearly stumbling. Catching himself, he took another, finding his rhythm. Rounding the corner, the most fantastic sight came into vision. The largest dogs he had ever seen ran from one end of the pen to the other. They were nearly twice his size and covered in a variety of patterns. "You there, Greenie!" Crinan turned, finding an orc standing beside one of the massive beasts. He ran a thick, bristled brush through the warg's fur, removing clumps of hair. "Get over here and do this." He laid the brush on the table and moved, letting the half-breed move where he had been. Crinan picked up the brush and pulled it through the coarse hair. He was amazed at how thick the fur was. "When you done, there's more." Next section change. For several days, Crinan collected mats of fur, stuffing it into heavy sacks. He'd wondered what they did with it, but his questions were soon answered. Crinan heaved the final sack onto a wooden cart, watching the wooden wheel carry it away. Following a supervisor as quickly as his body would allow, they traveled to the edge of the orc city. "Unload the sacks and dump the fur into that barrel." The grizzled orc abandoned the cart and wandered off toward one of the other huts. It didn't take long to finish his task. Awaiting the warg master, Crinan watched one of the orcs pull several handfuls of fur from one of the other barrels. He dropped it into a metal container and poured molten wax over the top, tapping on the side every so often and capping it with a plate. He pulled the lever. The metal container tilted on edge, moving away from the frame. It flipped on end and fell into the snow with a hiss. The orc grabbed another container and positioned it where the first had been. Breaking the seal, he removed the plates and reached in, pulling a blanket-like sheet from inside. Laying it over the mold, he pressed it into shape and tossed the finished piece onto a piled cart. Crinan saw everything from clothing to training dummies piled high. It seemed they used the fur for nearly everything. Inspecting his own clothing, he noticed the pressed fibers intertwined. "Come on, Greenie, we have cleaning to do." Crinan glanced back, noticing the warg master had returned. The scent of strong alcohol radiated from him. Moving as quickly as he could, he grabbed the handles of the cart and guided it. Following his supervisor, they returned to the pit. "Clean pens of shit, but stay away from Uma. She's due for pups, and you don't be messing with 'em." Crinan grabbed the shovel and squeezed between the runs. Tending his duties, he heard the first sounds of birth from the far pen. Laying the shovel against the barricade, he stepped through to see what was going on. He leaned against the rail, watching the 8 pups squirm around from the straw-filled pen. Their fur was clean and wet, suggesting she'd already cleaned them. They fought to get at her. He was amazed by their size. Even newborn, they were already the size of small dogs. An unusual movement caught his eye. He saw one of the pups dig its way from beneath the others. It was much smaller and having trouble finding its mother. Crinan recalled his orders, but he had to do something. It needed to eat. Climbing through the rails, he scooped the pup into his hand, positioned it at one of the unused nipples. The pup latched on and started eating. Standing guard, Crinan made sure the others didn't force it away. He waited patiently, ensuring it had its fill. "I told you to stay out." Crinan spun, seeing the enraged orc. "That one couldn't get food. I had help him." The warg master glared over the run, looking at the pups. "It's a runt, no use to us, like you. Won't survive the training. Take it out and kill it. Better die quick than suffer its whole life." "You want me to kill it?" Crinan couldn't believe what he was hearing. "That's what I said. Take it and kill it." The orc glared his command, daring the half-breed to argue. His head low, Crinan scooped the puppy up and stepped through the runs. He heard it whimper, begging to be returned to its mother. Stepping outside, he locked his arms around the pup, shielding it from the frozen wind. Carrying it to the side of the building, he stared into the animal's searching face. He watched its nose flex, learning his scent. I can't do this. Looking around, he made sure nobody was watching. Burying the pup in his shirt to keep it warm, he marched across the snow as quickly as he could and entered his own hut. Laying the pup in his bed, he covered it with the warg fur blankets. I'll come check on you when I can. Returning to the pit, the warg master gave him a questioning glare. Is it done? Crennan lowered his head. Yes. Good. Get back to cleaning the pens. Section change. Dimitrich stood at the edge of the highest balcony overlooking the forest city. He could see the peaks of Idenfall in the distance. Listening to the soft footsteps behind him, he waited for her touch. Elolon placed her hand on his hip, laying her chin against his shoulder. Wondering where they are again? I am. They should have been here months ago. I think I may have something that could help. We stopped a contraband shipment this morning. It had a few items the Shadow doesn't need. Elolon gently pulled against him, silently begging him to follow. Dimitrix followed her down one of the lower levels. Twice as many guards stood over this area as in any other he'd seen in the city. Elolon waited for the double doors to open. Stepping through, she approached a wooden chest running along the far side of the room. Dimitrix scanned the room, curious as to what was so important. Shelves lined the walls. Tables stood here and there. Chests and crates covered every surface, carved extensively with Alfaran runes. What is this place? He didn't need to ask. This was similar to their vault back home. It was the duty of a protector to lock away powerful artifacts. Sometimes keeping them out of the wrong hands meant hiding them from the world. This is where we put all the magic items we find. It's the only room we've been able to ward against the Charliettes. She opened the chest, retrieving a head-sized orb wrapped in a bronze-colored cloth. Laying it on the central table, the only table not littered by a chest, she gestured him over. I haven't seen one of these since I was a child. Even then, they were rare. Uncovering the orb, she kept her eyes off the reflection. What is it? Dimitrix studied the crystal surface, unable to find a single flaw or imperfection in it. It's a seer stone. It has many uses, but for you, it can show you where your friends are. She wrapped her arms around him, pressing her lips to his. You just need to place your hands on it and think of what you want to see. If it's capable, it'll show you. Returning her kiss, Dimitrix looked deep into her eyes. Why do you do all of this for me? Elolon smiled. You're unlike any man I've met. I could have continued on alone, but I chose not to. Despite your little quirks, which I enjoy, I see strength in you. I believe you're capable of great things, and I want to be beside you when you realize it too. Gently grabbing his wrist, she guided him to the sides of the orb. The clear stone was warm to the touch, but fogged around his grip. Dimitrix stared into the reflection. Show me Ravion. The image briefly distorted and became clear once again. Brianna, please go away.
I want to listen to you read.
Okay, then sit down on the bed and be quiet. The image briefly distorted and became clear once again. Ravion approached a village gate. Gareth marched behind him. They didn't appear a day older than when he left them, yet the past months his own hair had grown several inches, and a leafy brown beard had clung to his face and chin. I recognize that village. That's Tyrmor. That's about a month southwest of here, Elolon said. Dimitrix released the orb, letting the image fade. Turning to face her, a renewed hope radiated from him. Do you know of any way I might be able to get a message to them? I can think of a couple. Section change. The pub was near empty. Only a few men sat here and there enjoying their drinks. The fireplace crackled, sending a few glowing embers to the stone platform it rested upon. Gareth stepped through the door, searching the faces within. Happy to see a lack of orcs, he approached the bar and leaned against the counter. Need 2 rooms for the night. Ravion followed after, taking position beside his friend. The barkeep tossed a rag over his shoulder and reached under the counter, grabbing 2 keys. That'll be 4 Coryllium. The two men paused, hearing the currency. Ravion reached into his belt pouch. Will you take gold? The room went silent. Everyone turned to face the newcomers. The barkeep leaned in close, whispering to them, I wouldn't say that so loud around here. We ain't seen gold in these parts since I was a boy. Shadow runs pretty strong through here. You're liable to end up with an orc warvich in your gut before the night's out. Go around back. I'll meet you there. Increasing his tone, he nearly shouted, making sure everyone heard him. We don't use no resistance money around here. Get out. Find somewhere else to sleep. Ravion was a bit confused, but picked himself up and left. Gareth studied the man for a moment, unsure what was happening. Shaking his head, he turned and marched out. Reaching the back door, they waited patiently. A click echoed through the wooden barrier. It opened, revealing the barkeep. Sorry about that. Couldn't risk any of them reporting back. Here's your keys. And since she ain't working for the Shadow, I'll take 2 silver if you got it. Ravion pulled 2 gold pieces. Take this. If things get rough, you may need extra for repairs. Thanks much. Come on in. There's a ladder in the storeroom that'll take you upstairs. I'll send the girl up in a bit if you need anything. Ravion nodded his appreciation and stepped inside. Finding the ladder, he quickly climbed up and stepped onto the balcony overlooking the room below. Doors lined the outer wall on 2 sides. Checking the markings etched into the keys, they found the 2 rooms furthest from the stairs. They were blocked from view by a false wall. Stepping into their prospective lodging, they closed the doors behind them. Ravion laid on the bed, looking up to the vaulted ceiling. He recalled Cenaria, letting her scent flow through him. The warmth of her skin seemed so close, yet so far away. Looking upon her face in his memory, he closed his eyes, hoping to dream of her. A tap at the window roused him. Sitting up, he glanced out, seeing a hawk perched upon the sill. Standing, he approached and unlocked the wooden frame. Sliding it up in its track, the bird flew into the room, shedding a few of its smaller feathers. It landed on the back of a chair, waiting patiently. Ravion noticed a small piece of parchment wrapped around its leg. Untying the sinew, he unrolled it, studying the ink-stained markings. R. I'm glad you're well. When able, meet me at High Point Bluff. Travel north, keeping the forest within sight to the right. You'll know it when you see it. D. And that is the end of the chapter. We will try to resume next week. Hopefully things won't be overly busy for that, but until then, we'll see you guys next time. And if you wouldn't mind, log on to Amazon and wouldn't mind get on Amazon and review the books if you like them. And they help me out quite a bit by getting me with new people. But we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.